My name is Chris Ballinger. I work for Toyota Research Institute. Toyota Research Institute is in Silicon Valley. It's the part of Toyota that's looking into autonomous cars and robotics, and more recently, blockchain and distributed ledgers. Let me say, most of what I'm going to say is my personal views. All this stuff is too new for a big company like Toyota to have an institutional view, so please just blame it on me. Toyota's mission, it was begun about 2 years ago. Its mission was to use artificial intelligence to improve the quality of human life, so it was non-commercial from the start. It was dedicated to making automobiles safer, more affordable, and accessible, and really was about trying to make mobility and the benefits of mobility available to the vast majority of people in the world who really don't have good access to mobility today. You know, really only about 5% of the people in the world have access to a single occupancy car ride, whether it's an Uber, Lyft, a taxi, or a personally owned car. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. Now, those three areas, autonomous cars, robotics, AI, and or four areas in blockchain, I think are 4 out of the 5 items at the Gartner hype cycle. You know that graph, Gartner's hype cycle, the peak of the hype cycle. Those 4 of the 5 things mentioned. So since I'm involved in all of them, I think I'm in for a lot of disillusionment in the next few years, because that's what comes next in the hype cycle, is this big trough of disillusionment. That's what I've got ahead of me. So the last thing I'll say before I begin is that my entire presentation is stolen content. None of it's attributed anywhere. None of it's paid for, which maybe is an example of the problem that some of us are trying to address. All right, there's the clicker. Okay, so I got involved. My first exposure was when I had a boss I really liked back in early 2013 asked me about Bitcoin. Somebody had told him he should be investing in Bitcoin. And he asked me about it because I was the CFO of the company. And I told him, you know, look, private money doesn't work. It's been tried in the Middle Ages and every age since. Whatever you do, don't invest, and fire whoever is telling you to invest in Bitcoin. I feel kind of bad about it now, because had he invested at that time, he would have had about an 80,000% return. But he's been kind enough not to remind me of my bad advice. So any of you in the audience who are tempted to use anything I say as investment advice, in this case, right, past performance is a guide to the future. Do not listen. All right. So my next exposure was I got a new job where I was responsible for the innovation function. I began to think about some of the technologies that were disruptive in the auto industry, happened upon distributed ledgers and blockchain, and began to think about it. And in mid-2015, I gave a presentation to some senior executives, and I titled it the most important technology you've never heard of. And the first thing I did was ask them if anybody heard of blockchain, and nobody raised their hand. And so I began to go through some of the potential applications in the auto industry, and these were the ones that I put down. Remember, this was a couple of years ago. I probably would sort it a little differently now. And in the couple of years since, we've been able to do some POCs in a number of the areas, and the ones in red are the ones that we've done some POCs in. And I wanted to talk about 2 of them today.
Hello again from Project Oaken, now Oaken Innovations. We'd like to fill you in on what we've been working on since our first place win in the UAE blockchain GovHack. We're excited for the autonomous driving future, where cars will pilot themselves and customized mobility on demand is a reality. What will that autonomous driving future mean for all of us? A report released by RethinkX in May 2017 predicts that the cost of transportation as a service will save the average family $5,600 annually, the equivalent of a 10% raise in salary. This would be the largest increase in disposable income. This means an additional $1 trillion consumer savings in transportation costs that would be contributed back to the annual GDP and consumer spending, and an additional $1 trillion in productivity gains that will be realized from traffic time savings, a result of reclaimed driving hours. So, how do we get there? we'll need a platform for cars and data, an auto data exchange that others can consume, a sharing platform between automobile owners and riders, and per-use insurance. We're proud to announce a new blockchain mobility ecosystem. Oken Innovations has partnered with Toyota Research Institute along with other blockchain and distributed ledger technology startups, GIM, BigchainDB, and Commuters, to provide the initial auto platform that will power the ecosystem's automobile data exchange and mobility platform. With Oken's Auto Acorn, we have enabled automobiles to contribute to the open data exchange and the sharing economy. With tokenization of the car identity, we have enabled private GPS and timestamp data to this data exchange, immediately allowing for route optimization and capacity modeling for other entities to consume. This also allows the owner to lease their own vehicle to others by utilizing blockchain-based rider identity and commerce. Let's see what the car-sharing platform looks like. An authenticated rider finds an available vehicle to rent. Prices are published for the car rental. Rider selects the vehicle that they want to rent and can now unlock the doors. They use the car's push start button to operate the vehicle. In the background, we've powered on an internal automobile key fob and granted that rider the ability to operate the vehicle. Why is this valuable? Immediately, we've enabled automobile owners to monetize their unused vehicle time to trusted riders. In preparation for the future of autonomous vehicles, we've provided the platform for potential riders to hail and pay for on-demand mobility. In addition, we're inviting other developers, technology companies, and auto manufacturers to join us and our partners for the blockchain mobility ecosystem at blockchain-mobility.org. As always, stay tuned for more announcements from Oken Innovations.
All right, so that was Oken's video for the POC that we did. We actually presented that along with 3 other POCs at Consensus last May. And why I think it was interesting, why we did it, is this idea that very little of the existing capacity in the automotive ecosystem is used. Right? In the U.S., at least, cars are used 4% of the time. Even during the 4% of the time that they're being used and driven around, most of the seats in the car are probably empty, and so is the trunk. So there's an enormous amount of spare capacity. And one of the things blockchain does by lowering transactions costs and facilitating peer-to-peer transactions is it enables new business models that can take advantage of that unutilized capacity, right? Lower friction, lower transactions costs, easier to take advantage of the spare capacity in the system. And so this was an example of putting out a blockchain, the access to a car, smart contract, allowing somebody peer-to-peer to rent out their car, all in a secure way with everything built in. We did the same thing with another company selling empty seats, so basically ride-sharing on a blockchain. And then we did one on a usage-based insurance, and the final POC we did was the data exchange that was mentioned at the start. So let me talk a little bit about that. That was partially inspired by a talk by the founders of the Open Music Initiative. And it was thinking about the problems that they faced in data and what they were doing about it, and trying to create some security around how data was used, digital content was used, some tracking, some payments mechanisms when it was used. That got us thinking about, well, really, it's a lot the same problem in what we're trying to do with autonomous driving. Now, that might not seem intuitive at all, but let me tell you a little bit about why. So when we cue up the next video.
A Tesla driver smiling as he lets the car go on autopilot. Now he's said to be the first person to die using self-driving technology. Good evening, I'm Alan Martin.
And I'm Veronica Dela Cruz. The news already taking its toll on the Bay Area-based company. New at 6, KPX5's Kit Doe is outside the Fremont factory looking into how this could possibly happen.
Stop the video. Okay, the reason I want to stop the video is that's actually the wrong video, so I'll describe the right one to you. And it's my fault because I sent it in and probably had it queued to the successor on YouTube instead of the video that I really wanted. The video I really wanted was there's a Tesla in Texas, and it's somebody's got it on the dash cam of the car behind, and they're filming it. And the car drives towards some construction where a lane is blocked, where there's some construction in the lane. And they forgot to repaint the lines. So the lines on the road go straight into this construction barrier. And it's a construction barrier that's at an angle. the Tesla just cruises along and just goes right into the barrier. You see lots of sparks and big dent in the car. Nobody got injured or killed, so it wasn't a big tragedy. But the point is, right, the current generation of autonomous cars, the technology is really not all that good. And the problem with it is not really the sensors. I mean, the sensors need some maturity. The sensors need to come along a little bit. Tesla's cars mostly use visual cues, and we think that in the future that it's going to take an entire suite of radar and LiDAR and multiple cameras and onboard mapping capabilities, so a lot more. But the sensors will get there and get there fairly quickly. We think the problem that's going to hold the industry back is data. And the data that's needed is a massive amount, because we think that it will perhaps take 1 trillion kilometers or more to make cars really safe. Because it's really hard to get cars to recognize all of the things that can happen. And the way you do it, right, is machine learning, and you have to have the data to train the car on. But it can't just be any data. It can't just be sunny days in Mountain View, California, driving around on the same streets. What you need is data about events that happen, accidents, right? Monsoons in Mumbai, right? Blizzards in Bangor, and places where the driving is really difficult, right? And then you need to take that data. It needs to be not just the data that's breadcrumbing, the GPS data, but it needs to be the sort of high-resolution data that you get with multiple sensors. You need to take that into simulators, and then you need to simulate and simulate and simulate until you have 1 trillion or more kilometers of data. And then you have enough to train the cars, probably, to be better than humans by a multiple factor. And that's kind of what we think is needed. And the problem is that it's going to take a really long time for a car company to get to that level, right? I mean, really, the sensor packages are just beginning to get on cars. And so companies have picked up maybe thousands of miles, or in Google's case, a couple of million miles. Tesla's got many tens of millions of miles, but it's only optical data and GPS data, so it's not clear how useful that is. And so the idea was as companies begin to develop their rich sensor packages and begin to put them on cars, maybe we can share data. But obviously, right, that wasn't going to happen, because every company views the data as the secret sauce. Every company recognizes that it is about the data. And every company in the race says, no, I want to be the first, and it's my data that's going to help me get there. And the last thing I'm going to do is share it with others, because it's the classic problem of the digital commons. As soon as I share the data with others, I lose control of it. Everybody has it. Not only do I lose my competitive advantage, right, but everybody else now has it and has the competitive advantage over me. And so the idea was, if we could collaborate, if we could figure out a way that made companies comfortable sharing their data, and felt like they had the ability to source data from third parties and only share what of their own secret data they wanted to share, and to have some control over who used it after it left, in other words, a data marketplace with digital rights, we may be able to advance the day when that autonomous driving gets here by potentially years, because of the massive amount of data. Now, 1.2 million people die globally each year in auto accidents. That's pedestrians and drivers together. And luckily, we got in touch with BigchainDB. I think I found, in sort of researching this problem, I found one of Trent's blog posts on the internet and got in touch. And they also thought that this bringing forward the day of autonomous driving and saving 1.2 million lives a year was a worthy goal, and teamed up with us to try and work on the autonomous data market, driving data market. So let me shift gears for a minute and talk about maybe the bigger picture in this, which I think is one that's both disturbing and one that has tremendous potential. Mark Andreessen is famous for saying software is eating the world, right? But it's not really software that's eating the world. It's these platform companies that have software-enabled applications that are built on top of data monopolies or quasi-data monopolies, right? And so you have a series of companies, right, which are asset light, and yet are very successful and very large. And in fact, this is happening at an increasing rate. Virtually every company that's joined the top ranks of the S&P in the last 15 years has been a platform company that's built its business on some sort of quasi-monopoly of data. When we look forward in the automotive industry, what we see is increasingly a movement to mobility as a service. And that business, right, generates an enormous amount of data, right? And success in that business and competitive advantage in that business, again, depends on these kinds of platform quasi-monopolies of the data. So if you have data and you're running around as a mobility as a service and running that business, you're going to be collecting more data and building even more barriers to entry for others. And so in thinking about that, what kind of world, right, do we want? And what do we need to do today to prevent, right, that world to be dominated by one or two or just a few players? And one of the things that seems to me to be essential is this question of identity and protecting identity. And identity in the broader sense, not just who are you, but what do you do, what are your preferences, what's your history, where did you go at what point in time, right, the mobility piece of it. All of that together is what's meant by identity. And in this world of the future, right, it's going to be important that the individual have some control over their own identity, because without that, there isn't a lot left, perhaps, right, and as farther you get out in the future, when AIs and robots can do more things more efficiently than people, it's not clear that there's a lot left, right, for people to really monetize other than this broader sense of their identity. And so we should be concerned about that, and we should be thinking about how to keep that in individuals' hands, how to protect it, how to create the ability of individuals to monetize. All right, so one last thing. One of the things that struck me as interesting about the blockchain space, but also kind of frustrating, was everybody seemed to be out there, right, doing proof of concepts, right, including us. And then the proof of concepts would be announced, a big headline, it would generate some buzz, and then it would go nowhere, right? And you see this again and again, and everybody's putting something on a blockchain, but nobody uses it, there's no enterprise applications, there's no customer-facing large-scale thing being done. So what does it take? It seemed to me that the problem was really one of scale and network effects. The blockchain is the ultimate platform business, but it takes scale, right? Like any platform. Right? A single fax machine is a great doorstop. 100,000 fax machines is a revolutionary form of communication. Right? You get enough scale in the blockchain, right, and then it becomes useful. And the automotive industry and transportation generally, or mobility as a service, seems to be a good candidate. Why? About 5% of existing GDP is mobility and transportation. As we move into a future world of mobility as a service, that will probably grow to closer to 10%. And so in this industry alone, there probably is the scale to have a customer-facing application that's worthwhile. And so my interest and my effort recently has been trying to get the industry together, thinking about how we can work together, have a common approach perhaps to a tokenized economy and mobility services. Again, if you want to pay tolls with a car, it would be helpful to have all cars have the same types of tokens so that they could be all used in the same applications. So that's the kind of thing that I've been interested in and working on recently and would love to talk to people about over the next day and a half. So with that, let me stop, and I don't know if we have time for questions or not. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, yes. We have time for a few questions for Chris, so shoot. There is.
Maybe a bit of a cheeky question, but you ended with saying like everybody's building their own proof of concepts and MVPs, but that's where it stops. So can I return that question and say like, why isn't Toyota like starting a fund for a couple of billion to actually propel this into the next generation?
That's kind of an easy one, actually, and it is probably the same problem at every big company, which is people's understanding of the technology is all over the map. And so you have, maybe one or two senior executives who might have heard about blockchain or distributed ledgers and have a positive view of it, and you might have lots of others who have only read about Bitcoin and the dark web and money laundering and want nothing to do with it. And so it's just probably premature to expect large companies that, remember, large companies, they're conservative, but they're conservative because they're terrified of appearing on the front page of a newspaper in a bad way. That's what damages your stock. And so they tend to be conservative. They tend not to jump out in front of things. We're able to have more freedom at the Research Institute because we don't have any commercial, but we also have to be careful about doing things in too big a way. So that's part of the reason why we're trying to get the industry together, so we don't have to be out in front all by ourselves. Is it? All right, so...
Hello?
Yeah.
One question. You said that data that will be collected about the people it will be very important to protect it. So the ID in a broader sense. But we are creating here a technology which will massively collect all this data about the individuals. And now is the question, how do we succeed in securing this data to secure the privacy, as we had already a talk today?
Yeah.
Because on one hand, this technology can bring us more freedom. On the other hand, it can become an Orwellian nightmare. So how can we handle that?
I'm not going to have a good answer for that one. I'm sure that there's some philosophers in the audience that have a much better answer. First of all, right, we're not creating the technology, right? I mean, our cars are going to have a lot of sensors on them. The digital exhaust that's coming out of the car is massive, right? I mean, the pipes out of the car can't even handle that today. Some of that data is going to be data that probably the individual should own. Where do I go? Did I stop at Starbucks? Who did I visit? What time did I leave here? Go there. But there's going to be other data that maybe the individual shouldn't own. For example, the car is going to have cameras on it. Those cameras will be taking pictures around. Is it going to be doing facial recognition of the people in the crowds as it drives down the street? I don't know, but probably not a good idea to give that control to the person who's in the car. If you own the car, I could imagine selling streams of data. For example, the windshield wipers in a car are going to give micro information about weather conditions that would be valuable to somebody. When the car hits a pothole, that's going to be valuable information about road conditions that could be sold to a city for car repair and be a lot cheaper than sending inspectors out to look for potholes. So maybe that's something that should be owned by whoever owns the asset or owns the car. So I think there's a whole lot of questions, opportunities, and also risks in that data, but I don't have good answers for the question.
Maybe at least the OEM shouldn't own it all.
I think all the OEMs dream of a world where they own the data platform, but realistically, not all of us, right, can be the owner of the big data platform. Exactly. And in fact, right, looking at history, it's often not the old industry that ends up controlling the new platform, right? So we have to worry about who the new competitors are.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.